Good afternoon. I'm Julia Coakley, Director of Operations at the MGAA. I'm delighted to welcome you today to the second in our series of 6 sessions aimed at senior leaders and managers looking at diversity, equity and inclusion and how you can influence and implement current legal procedures and best of class culture within your own organisation. Before we start, I'd just like to cover a few housekeeping points. Please ensure that your microphone and your camera is off and your Zoom chat box button is visible. Your questions will be answered during our Q&A period at the end of this training session and can remain anonymous unless you let us know otherwise. So please feel free to ask any questions and take this opportunity to utilise Holly's longevity of experience and knowledge on this extremely important topic. This training is accredited for CPD points if relevant to your ongoing professional development, and the video with supporting materials will be available within the members area of our website post-event. Following today's session, you'll be sent a brief questionnaire, which I would ask you please take 2 minutes of your time to complete. It is especially important to the MGAA that this programme of training is adding value to your MGAA membership, so that your views are integral to allowing us to make this happen and produce the best quality events. So I'd like to introduce you to Holly Mapstone, Senior Human Resources Business Partner, and joining us on behalf of our training partner, Searchlight Insurance Training. Holly is an associate of CIPD with extensive board-level HR experience, including at HR director level, FCA certified. Her pragmatic and agile approach combined with strong operational, strategic and commercial experience delivers business improvements and cost savings whilst driving up employee engagement. Holly's passion to create resilient and positive cultures will engage your teams and influence the business to execute excellence. So Holly, if I might hand over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to have to keep following this bio every single time just to get used to it. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining today. Thank you, Julia. Okay, so we're just going to kick off with the content today, and then, as Julia said, we will have time for a Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to use the chat box throughout this session, and we will get round to answering them. So today's session is on the challenging conversations, the what, why, and how. The session 1, we did more of an educational piece around ED&I, what that means, and where do you start in terms of tackling your equity, diversity, and inclusion. So this session is much more practical in terms of your everyday working life and how that then entwines with the diverse workforce that you already have. So let's kick off. So the learning objectives for today. So by the end of the session, you'll be able to identify what makes conversation with your peers and teams challenging. So, the why. Explain how to fully prepare for these conversations in the future, including learning tools and resources that will support you with the process. Summarize how to handle the challenging conversations, executing the message and adapting to different approaches and learning styles in an extra way. And then finally, we kind of do a nice summary at the end of the do's and don'ts. And there's some additional reading material, etc. And then obviously onto the questions. So really, really practical. Okay, so let's just kick off. I always like to kick off with a little bit of case law. So why is this important? It goes without saying, obviously, challenging conversations happen all the time. So this blurb that I've got on screen now is a part of a transcript from a tribunal in Reading last month, where operation was unfairly dismissed after line manager attempted to push resignation tribunal rules. And in this specific case, this is one I picked on, there is details within the transcript to say that there's correspondence between the MD and the manager, kind of corresponding around, well, what's the worst that can happen? How much could we get sued for dismissing? And as you read through the transcript, actually what transpires is the dismissal happened because they just weren't performance managing. And the ET ruled that actually the employee wasn't unfairly dismissed However, the process in which they come to the decision was unfair. So they took an inadequate investigation into the problems that the employee was suffering with, which then led to the unfair dismissal. So it's really important that actually you as a business can make decisions and follow a process potentially around performance management that could be deemed as fair. But actually, if your preliminary work isn't done, then it kind of undermines the process itself. So just on this case, the fact that they didn't thoroughly investigate the employee's personal circumstances and investigate, the problems that that employee was having, that potentially led to this claim, and the employee did win last month, and it was only a small payout of £2,020, but all the while I'm just saying that's completely avoidable if the manager and the MD would have had that kind of conversation sooner and been prepared to have that sort of challenging conversation. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight that, is very small misses in a process can lead to actually quite big implications for a business, not even financially, but just from a PR piece. And then we look at the legal pitfalls when we think about challenging conversations. So one example I draw on is always the appraisals. So let's think about what people do in appraisals that could cause you problems. So saving issues for the appraisal meeting. I've seen this done time and time again, and for whatever reason, people don't want to address the problem at the time of the event, or they think it's better to put off until the mid-year or end-year appraisal, subsequently leading to an unfair dismissal because we haven't addressed the concerns early enough and we haven't done intervention and we haven't had those conversations. Failing to record concerns, again, where are your facts? Where are your records? Where are you making it completely objective? Again, another pitfall that we see time and time again. Forgetting absent employees is a really key one, specifically when we think of appraisals, but other employment law. So if you've got somebody on long-term sick, potentially if they're on paternity, maternity, I see this quite often where employers will forget to include these employees within the appraisal process. And that could potentially open the business up to risk for a discrimination claim. Again, being completely inclusive to all those employees, just because someone's on long-term sick, just because someone's taken some time out of the business, we shouldn't be excluding them. And then providing subjective feedback is a big no-no. So again, as I said, being objective as you possibly can removes any risk to the business for potentially putting in claims for discrimination, leading to allegations that you have fallen on the side of your manager's preconceived judgments, assumptions and biases. So again, this is all really key when we're thinking about why we should be having these conversations. I think we're just in the waiting room. There we go. Okay, so the first poll for today. So do you find some conversations with your peers and team challenging? Yes or no?
Thanks for that, Holly. So for those of you online, please do give your views, straightforward yes or no. So the question, as Holly said, do you find some conversations with your peers and team challenging? We've got 93% interestingly saying yes, just 13%, 2 respondents no. So do please drop your responses. This is anonymous, so feel free to be honest. Just a moment or two longer. And thank you. So I'll end the poll and share the results there.
Perfect. So 88% of you said yes, you do find conversations challenging. That one. So you're not on your own. So we all find these conversations challenging. So you're slightly higher than the average. So 66% of people within businesses feel stressed and anxious about these conversations. Even more extreme, 11% of people actually have nightmares, sleepless nights if they know they've got to go into the business the following day and have a conversation that they find challenging. So this is even more prominent now, given these results, that we need to start taking action. We need to start, supporting those people in doing these conversations. second poll. So what do you feel creates the most fear and anxiety? So not knowing how other people will respond, not being able to get your point across clearly, not being comfortable with the situation, getting upset or emotional yourself can sometimes feel challenging, and then the other person getting upset and emotional. I appreciate some of you may want to click more than one, but we've just got, click the one that stands out the most to you if you can, please.
Thanks, Holly. I did miss a question there that matches your slide, so apologies for delegates on that, but do feel free to submit your answers again, completely confidential. This is just about numbers of attendees and what's happening. So again, the question, what do you feel creates the most fear and anxiety? The options to choose are not knowing how the other person will respond, not being able to get a point across clearly, getting emotional or upset, or the other person getting emotional or upset. So we've got 47% with the fear of the unknown of a response, 31 not being able to get the point across, and 25% the other person getting emotional or upset. So give it a moment or two just for anybody else to consider what they would like to respond to on that question. And I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. So ending at 41% is coming in at the highest for not knowing how the other person will respond. End that one and share those results. So again, unsurprising, it's not unknown. So when you're asked what caused the fear, 43% of people say not knowing how other people respond. So you're bang on the money in terms of the statistics. 31% of people fear not being able to get their point across. 29% of people are getting upset and emotional themselves. They feel that that's like a vulnerability. 21% of people feel that upsetting the other person and not knowing how to deal with their emotions is also quite challenging. So types of challenging conversations, I would like to use the chat on this, and it can be throughout the session, so don't feel as though you need to jump straight in, but just have a think about the types of challenging conversations that you've had or you may have in the short to medium term, and just pop those in the chat box, and also just give me a brief description of what is particularly challenging to those, and then we can have a little review at the end. So I'll run through a couple of types of challenging conversations that I think could be categorized. So the first one is giving feedback. This is something that everybody fears because, when you typically think of feedback and then you're fearful of it, you're thinking of negative connotations around performance, communication style, interaction. So when we're thinking of giving feedback, it could be to a team member, so it could be to a peer, or to someone that you're managing, and we're thinking about how do you deal with behavioural conduct, capability, how do you get that across? It's really difficult. Also giving feedback from suppliers and partners, so it could be someone completely external to your business, and that is also challenging. It could be delivery times, it could be project plan leads, and giving that feedback on why that isn't, and that can be challenging. Senior leaders, this is an interesting one. So actually delivering the feedback upwards, that comes out always on top is one that's very challenging, because there's this feeling around the fact that it's impossible to give negative or constructive feedback to someone more senior to you, which is absolutely ridiculous when you think about the actual practicalities of that, because everyone should have good and bad feedback. And then delivering news, so maybe you're delivering company-wide news that could be positive or negative, and that could be challenging to you. Receiving feedback is something that when you're on the receiving end can also be challenging, and maybe when you find yourself in a more senior position, like we just seen on the first slide, there's this expectation that you perform in a certain way and you react in a certain way to feedback. But actually that's still challenging, because everyone's evolving and developing and everyone's in a different part of their journey. So receiving feedback is challenging, and ways to combat that is obviously senior leaders showing their willingness to listen, accepting that positives and negatives happen throughout your career, and actually being able to be a role model and act on that feedback is something that kind of will make you stand out in terms of being able to process that feedback. And then disagreements and confrontations. So one kind of leads into the other in my view. So you can have a disagreement, and that can be for all sorts of reasons. It could be between teams, it could be between projects, it could be between conduct and capability, which we'll go on to further. And all those sorts of disagreements will then build up, and then that's what leads to the confrontation. And I think if you can react to the disagreement in the instance that it happens, we can prevent that confrontation happening, which then that's what actually creates the challenge around those. So it's about being proactive in recognizing when disagreements can happen as a senior leader. And those can happen in all sorts of different situations. So let's think about difficult working relationships. So it could be situational. It could be very much you've got your sales team and your credit team, and the situation is that they work on very different ends of the business, and it's just a difficult working relationship. And it's not about saying how are we going to change that, because some teams do just naturally have that conflict, and that's good. But how do we manage that in a way that's healthy? Then you've got working style clashes. So again, I think we talked about this in workshop 1, where we talked about understanding people's styles. We come on to in another session around understanding your people, and that psychometric testing and neuro-linguistic programming. We kind of talk about that, but that could be one of the reasons why you just process information differently, you understand in a different way, you have a cognitive processing procedure in a different way. There could be culture clashes, so it could be from where you're previously from, your working experience, your career, what you're culturally used to in terms of behavior and language and tone. It could just be different, which then creates this kind of difficult working relationship. And then this all leads to conflict, which is not what we want. On the extreme style, so exclusionary behavior. So when you have somebody that's potentially being excluded from work-related matters, and that then extends to social. So if you're thinking of Friday work drinks, which could maybe extend to Thursday work drinks, if there's Christmas or summer parties or anniversaries that kind of happen within the business, if someone's being excluded from those because of this conflict, then that leads to then discriminatory claims, disengagement, further conflict, and I put on there obviously verbal disclosure behavior can be such a small thing, such as microaggression. It doesn't have to be something really obvious, and as a senior leader we need to be mindful of those signposts and those signals in which we should be looking for. Hopefully that the physical exclusionary behavior is something very rare, but it does happen. So challenging subjects, what do we find challenging to talk about? So top one of the list is always pay. People find this incredibly difficult to talk about, whether it's challenging for an increase, challenging a bonus payment that they think they're due. It is just one that's quite emotive. And when you get that emotion involved, that's when people find it challenging to articulate their point. Inappropriate behavior is something also that people find challenging because it's very poignant and focused on one particular event. And again, it brings that level of emotion. So it's hard for people to feel that they can come across in a very pragmatic way. Poor performance is unsurprising, and we're going to come on to that in a little bit more detail, but for obvious reasons, we've seen on that slide 2 on that employment tribunal claim, it's so common that people are not prepared to do performance management because they're fearful of the challenging conversations. Health, people don't like to talk about health. We talk about well-being, and mental health is being such a huge topic, particularly in HR. It's the hot topic, but people feel fearful of talking about their mental health, their neurodiversity or neuroneutral health, which we come on to in a little bit more detail. But again, all those sorts of things can bring barriers. And then death, people don't like talking about death. So again, people might take time off work because there's a death, but not say why, put it as something else, performance dips, and then you see the snowball effect where we don't actually know the real reason why people are struggling. So poor performance, why do we avoid this subject till it's too late? I ask myself this question all the time. So fear of an ET claim, I think, is high on the list. So the discrimination claims and the Equality Act 2010, it has a wide breadth of things that cover that. We've talked about that in depth the last time in regards to what's covered as a disability, and mental health is covered as a disability. And I think for an employer's perspective, it's fearful. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to talk in the wrong context. I recently seen a tribunal call judgment, and it was based on an employer not being able to make reasonable adjustments for their employee. They had autism, and it wasn't actually the fact that they weren't trying to make the adjustments. There was a letter sent to the employee after this conversation had happened, and it kind of happened way too late, and they didn't realize that this employee had autism. A letter then got sent saying, of course we'll support you, etc., etc. And there was one line at the bottom of this letter that said, almost apologizing for not knowing, and that they believed that the exact wording was, as you have perceived and masked this. And because of that terminology and that language that they've used, the ET then ruled that the employer was insinuating that the employee had covered that, and it was intentional. And so, again, just small things like that it's hardly surprising why employers are fearful of making these discussions about poor performance. Hybrid and siloed working, people can work on their own. Maybe managers don't know actually what they're supposed to be doing, or don't actually know that output, and then that puts in a barrier, or they can't establish the facts. And then everyone is fearful of the grievance. So you think, right, I'm going to go down the performance route, and if that employee is probably then going to launch a grievance about a whole other heap of issues that maybe happened a few months ago, and it's almost not worth upheavaling that, so they put off that. Again, if we'd have had the conversation sooner around maybe those situations that happened to prevent the grievance, then we could do the performance management. Okay, so I think this is the final poll for the session. So what do you think are the main areas of difficulty now we've explored the different types? So what prevents you from doing this? So a lack of skill training and experience, the avoidance of discomfort and fear, lack of time, or lack of cultural values and internal processes to support.
Thanks, Holly. We've got some real quick off the mark respondents. Thank you for that. So we've got the main concern at the moment is lack of skill training or experience, 63%, 38% avoidance of discomfort or fear. No one is suggesting difficulty as a lack of time. We've got 8%, actually just one respondent saying lack of cultural values or internal processes to support. So once again, answers are anonymous. Question being, what do you think are the main areas of difficulty? Now we have explored all types of conversations. So lack of skill training or experience, avoidance of discomfort or fear, lack of time, lack of cultural values or internal processes to support. Just a moment or two longer for people to respond. Again, this is anonymous, so do feel free to be transparent. And I'll end the poll there. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So 53% say lack of skill training and experience. I'm pleased to see that nobody responded with lack of time, because quite often you see that that reasoning, and we all know it's not lack of time. Everybody's got time that they can squeeze in or they can plan into their diary, and it's normally another reason. So and if we're thinking about the lack of skill training experience, let's think about how we then cascade that down to your middle management and your supervisors, so that they've got the experience within their career to kind of carry this through. And why are some more difficult than others? So it relies on the sorts of conversations that you're having to have. There's the difficult employee that everybody will, as I immediately say that, everyone will have someone unfortunately spring to mind within their business that they've categorized as the difficult employee. And then it's also difficult because it's maybe you or the manager that's struggling with this. So there's an accountability from your side on trying to make this as unchallenging as you can. And what might be going on with that individual? So when we go back to that difficult employee, in the view of a claimant's lawyer, perceived difficult employees is always a really interesting comment. So are they difficult or are they having difficulties? And that's something I always like to flag. You know, when we think about, do we really know what's going on with that person? Have we really taken the time to understand and explore everything about them? When we talked on the last session around equity, it wasn't a case of just having a policy and applying it to all. The equity piece was actually adapting it to each person's outcome. And I think that's really key in this position. If you've got somebody that springs to mind that's difficult, have you explored every avenue of equitable conversation and language, and had those conversations around exploring why, what difficulties are they having, just so you're covering your own perspective and understanding rather than just categorizing them. So let's think about how you'd prepare for these conversations. So obtaining the facts is key. So we want to talk about exactly what's happened. So you want to firstly think about who is involved, who needs to be involved, who needs to be there. If you've got a working relationship between two people that is particularly challenging and there's conflict, how can you manage that and minimize that as a senior leader? You know, could you do the conversation yourself? Could you help prepare with that manager to mitigate the risk of it imploding into a really difficult conversation? What do you need to find out? You know, what are the facts? What are the figures that you need to reference? So just gain all the facts around that conversation, that topic that you need to talk about, and make sure that we're trying to be completely objective as we can. Also think about how would you want this to be resolved, and what would your suggestions be? So again, if maybe you're coaching then your middle management, think about that and come with your own solutions around the facts around how you want to be dealt with. Plan and agree times. So we really need to think about planning ahead, giving people enough notice to know that the conversation's happening. Quite often you will see, and I've had this done to me, where you'll either have someone walk past your desk, your line manager, and they'll say, have you got 5 minutes? And then immediately you're thinking, this is really bad. Why am I being called in? And quite often it's not. But these kind of off-the-cuff kind of conversations and meetings are just not conducive to someone approaching that conversation in a calm and reasonable manner. Equally, having someone ping something in your Outlook calendar and the title just being catch up or talk. I've had that all the time, you know, just a catch up email. Well, what catching up about? I don't know. So plan what the conversation, you need to set the scene. You need to be completely transparent. Give people enough indication of how that conversation is going to go. Let them plan themselves as well. It creates a level playing field, and it reduces the ability for the employee to be defensive. Agree times, you know, make it so that it's not right at the end of the day, so you're rushing. I've seen that again. Everybody leaves at 2 or 4 o'clock on a Friday. They just want to get it done and run out the door, or log off. That's just not conducive to actually being constructive and planning ahead. You know, let people have enough time in their diary to take some time, maybe reconnect the same day. So just have that as a consideration. Select the best platform and location. So again, we've got video calls. Is that appropriate to do for the person that you're talking to? Do they like to process information in a way that's audible? Or do they like things written down beforehand? We talked about this previously around how they like, do people like to process things in bullet point form? Do they like evidence-based beforehand? So again, just think about the best platform. If you're going to just do this on a telephone call, again, are you missing out on key communication cues? And then in person, it's always best to be more prepared when you're in person so you can retain engagement, eye contact, and do that active listening. So again, just picking the best platform for that employee. And it's not a case of we're going to do them all over video or we're going to do them all in person, because that's what makes me feel the most uncomfortable. It's about being agile enough to adjust to the person involved. Structure and sequence. So this is the best part about the planning and the preparation, is just establishing how you're going to tackle that conversation. So a well thought out sequence includes questions. So you're going to start off with questions. So how do you think this has gone? Tell me about this situation. Get the employee to open up and tell their view around an activity, a project, a certain objective that you're kind of going to be talking about. So ask those probing questions. Follow up with your thoughts on that. So firstly, I would say on this is you want to avoid we as a plural context. So that very much creates a team versus I, then that creates the barriers. So I think rather than we think, there's no size larger. So I think this is what I think. And this is where you're going to then produce all your facts and input. So you're going to completely base your thoughts and process around the facts that you've managed to obtain. Don't fill in any gaps. And if there are gaps, ask for input. So re-clarify. Once you've got that clarification, you've got that open dialogue going about the facts that the evidence that you've produced. If they disagree, ask why, gain clarification, check that your understanding is okay. And I think on this bit, when you're checking and getting the clarification, it's really important to stay quite vulnerable yourself. So if they're challenging something, try to avoid going completely defensive and be open to their thought process, be open to the fact that they're going to challenge it, and be okay to say, okay, I need to just go away and check that then. I need to just verify validate how solid this evidence is that we're talking about. So I completely respect that you want me to go away and check that, rather than saying, no, categorically, I'm not going to listen to you. Being open enough is where you become fair and reasonable. Ask, agree the next step. So what are we going to do off the back of this? You've said this, I've thought that, we've now agreed on this. What's the positive outcomes that can come from this? So that would be your next step. And then reflect and summarize. Always do this at the end of the meeting, and then follow that up with an email so you've got written confirmation. Again, thinking about those ET claims that we've seen at the start. If you've got a well thought out conversation, that you then have a bullet point summary that you followed up with the employee, this is all supporting you as a senior leader within your business, being able to have that challenging conversation well. And then finally, maintaining engagement. So be prepared that the employee may want to go off piece. Be prepared that they may want to talk about other stuff. Try to navigate the conversation along the structure and sequence, whilst if something else needs to be discussed, it's about being able to say, okay, let's park that for 1 second. We're gonna keep this conversation going based on the conversation and the plan, and we'll revert back to that. So just make sure that the engagement maintains on the structure and sequence that you want, whilst picking up the other points afterwards. So once you've planned it, it's about the main, I guess the core piece of this is actually executing the conversation. So you can feel really prepared, you can feel really in control of your data that you've got in front of you and the sequence and how you're going to execute it. But it is all different when you're sat in front of somebody, because how somebody reacts, like we said, is unpredictable, and that's the biggest fear, is not being able to get your point across, or upsetting somebody, or not knowing how they're going to handle the situation. So handling it is 70% of where the work needs to happen. So when we think about this, let's think about types of people. So you've got yourself. Think about yourself before you're entering this conversation. What do you know about yourself? What annoys you? What are your triggers? So if you were in the other person's shoes, it's about being really self-reflective on this piece. What sort of language do you not, what puts up barriers? What creates you to be defensive, and think about that kind of self-reflective piece as part of your journey in terms of handling this, because you want to definitely carry that through and treat the team or the employee how you want to be treated. Preferences. When we think of preferences for communication, what is your team's preferences? Again, we talked about this in session 1 around cognitive processing. So being completely inclusive isn't just saying we're doing everything over email, we're doing everything over the phone, I'm going to send you a really long email and then you're going to have to just process it, because we all know in the diverse world that we live in that people do process stuff differently. So what's their preference of communication style? Do they like maybe the evidence sent beforehand so they can prepare? Do they just like a phone call and then maybe a couple of hours just to process it and then they'll jump on a Teams call? So think about that and don't just apply one rule fits all. You know, you have to show that you've made reasonable adjustments in terms of how you can get your point across. Behaviour. So again, what do you find difficult or challenging? Language, conduct, raised voices, and then that leads on to the culture. So cultural differences within your team and backgrounds. So social cultural differences is key. Do you have teams that have natural conflict, like we said before? Maybe it's sales and credit or risk and delivery, or you know, and there's those natural conflicts, but actually do you have unconscious bias decisions in there that impact the levels of integrity of that kind of conversation? How, as you as a senior leader, can you combat that? So one, you can obviously just try to remove as many people in terms of this conversation to reduce the level of assumptions, but also yourself. Just be mindful, where do your unconscious bias comes from, and how do we control that? So the people dynamics is key. So again, roles. Is there a challenge because of the roles they're in, and what's reasonable and what's not? And I think have that really clear in your mind, is what's a reasonable conflict and what isn't, and just be prepared to kind of set the boundaries as a senior leader. Your assumptions. So are you assuming the facts and not being open-minded? So again, going into this, you have your evidence, you've obtained your facts. So are you assuming that this person knows that they're supposed to be doing it this way? Are you assuming that they know that this was part of the project plan, that they met, you know, the challenging conversation might be that they're moving to a different department at the end of this project, or they were always going to work under a different leader? Are you just assuming that? So try to be as open-minded as you can. Don't let it cloud your judgment in any way. Expectations. So do you and the other employee have the same expectations, or are they vastly different? And if that is the case, if it's the latter, then why is that? You know, is there been a breakdown in communication? Are they under the impression that the expectations were different because of what other people within the business are being treated like? Again, we think about that equity piece and inclusion. So just be mindful of the expectations that you've previously set and that are ongoing. And personal life. What do you know about that person that could impact this conversation? I'm not saying that everybody should know absolutely everything, but you know, what's going on in that person's personal life that could potentially impact this conversation? You know, is it childcare? Is it caring for dependents? Is it menopause? Is it mental health? Is it neurodiversity? Is it social within the workplace? So just to be really mindful that that has a contributing factor to, one, the success of the conversation, but two, actually your execution and how you handle this. So it's quite easy to say, oh, well, that's personal and this is business. The two, unfortunately, with a challenging conversation, and when you've got things like disability, discrimination, reasonable adjustments coming into play, those sorts of languages, we need to be mindful of the personal life. Being aware of your emotions and handling it in the best way is always key. So being aware is just one thing, and that planning and that preparation will really help you. Neuro-linguistic programming is a really interesting topic, which I would, if anybody is interested in this, I would highly recommend going and doing some Googling. It's really interesting in the fact that it can change the way you think and your behaviours, which then ultimately change your outcome. It's a program based on the fact that they believe that your thoughts control your actions control your output controls your end goal. So the fact that actually how you talk to yourself and your emotions within your own self-mind actually can recreate and rechange your output. So really interesting concept, so worth having a look at if that's something that interests you. Negativity and anger, so we're just reducing that, and if you can feel that creeping in, you need to take control of the conversation, you need to stop gap, you need to do a circuit breaker right there and then, let somebody step away, take some space. The fourth one on there, make the space. So be agile enough to know when it's time to step away. If you're maybe in part of the sequence, if you've got down to the point where you're having these conversations and establishing the facts and there's still conflict, it's always best to put a circuit breaker in. Just say, look, we're just not going to agree right now. I can see this is very emotive for you. I don't want to try to make you any more distressed. Let's reconvene tomorrow, same time if that works for you. Go away, take all of this, I'll email this to you, go away, have a think. If you've got any questions, send me them beforehand. Let that space be there to support you and them. You may go away and then think, actually, they raised a really valid point that I haven't really considered, and I should probably check that. So be just really aware of your emotions and how to let the emotions try to remain as neutral as possible. Showing empathy as a senior leader. So people can say they're empathetic, but their actions and how they execute it says differently. So just saying, oh yes, I'm empathetic isn't just going to cut it, unfortunately. So understanding what their situation is, being fully aware, setting the scene maybe before you set out. So appreciate this is a difficult time for you. I'm just understanding we need to just cover this task I emailed you about. So let's just talk about this in a wider scope. I'm mindful of these things. It's not saying that just maybe because someone is suffering with something that you cannot do that performance management, you cannot do that challenging conversation. It's just being mindful that the two can exist, they can coexist. How might they be feeling? So again, do you need to just do smaller meetings? Is it, some people just can't expect to do an hour-long meeting and everything's going to be rosy. It's not as simple as that. So can you actually do them in bite-sized bits to make it more processable for them? And are you making judgments based on the fact of what you do know about their situation? So, they've got young children and they're always late for work and you need to have this conversation, and they blame it on the traffic. So you're going to make a judgment that they don't plan enough. Think about this in terms of, are you showing empathy enough to say, well, actually, I'm coming in late because I'm avoiding this one person in the office because I can't work with them. And just reducing again those biases that come in. Be constructive, so clear language. We do a session on inclusive communication, but your language needs to be completely clear, and this goes back to your sequence. So setting out exactly what you're going to say in what order is really, 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 really important. Using examples, don't rely on opinions or facts. So don't say he says, she says, I've seen. You want to know exactly what's happening and rely on those facts. Offer suggestions in a positive way to move forward. So again, be seen to be proactive in wanting a resolution is really key, especially when we're thinking about conversations that haven't gone well. And I've seen things in transcripts from tribunals. It's mainly when employers haven't done that kind of positive step to showing willingness and suggestions. So that's always really key to do that. And then plan next steps. So you need to both agree, what are the actions, when are we going to meet? Let's set this up so we have this ongoing dialogue. It's not a one conversation and we're fixed. So the do's and don'ts. How are we doing this time? Doing good. So things to do: plan and prepare, draw on examples and remain calm. Take responsibility. So if there's something that you need to do as a senior leader, you need to go away and make sure you deliver on that. It's not all on them. It's a partnership that you're going to try to come to this resolution. Clarify next steps and actions is key. Things to avoid. So sugarcoating it doesn't help anybody. Unnecessarily pre-rambling. So again, if you set the scene on the email and you've told them what you want to kind of roughly catch up on, and then maybe you've sent some documents for them to review and validate, there's not really much point you sitting there for 10 minutes talking about the weekend, because all that person can think in their mind is, just get on with it. We know we need to just talk about this. So try to avoid unnecessarily delaying the conversation because you feel nervous. But be prepared to tackle this. Jargon and business speak, again, thinking about the people that you're working with within, you know, when they're feeling stressed and anxious, their cognitive processing performance reduces. So actually try to reduce any element where people can get confused, misheard, be clear, concise. There's no need to overcomplicate the topics or conversations that you're talking about. Don't leave the conversation with confusion. So if you're leaving thinking, I didn't really know what he meant by that, or did she mean this system or that system that I need to check? Again, just being completely crystal clear and transparent over what you've discussed. Picking sides as a senior leader is a definite thing to avoid. Over-promising. So again, if they challenged you and you said, right, I need to go and check that and I'll get back to you within the hour. If you know you're absolutely stacked for the rest of the afternoon, just don't overpromise, because people will then feel as though you're being unreasonable. So manage people's expectations. I'll get back to you within the end of the week. Let's talk about it next week. So don't overpromise. Blaming others. That goes as far as the systems as well. I see that where, oh, the data's not valid, or we can't do KPIs because this, that and the other, IT have lost this. You know, avoid shifting the blame. Just try to be as authentic as you can and have that ownership and responsibility. And getting defensive doesn't get us anywhere. So again, if something sounds right from their point of view, but it's not what you want to hear, try to just remove that defensive barrier and just show a level of accountability to acknowledging it, because quite often if you acknowledge something, that's all that person wants, is that acknowledgement rather than a resolution at that point in time. Some further reading just to consider. So Quiet by Susan Cain is Sunday Times bestseller, and it's around the power of introverts. So again, when we're thinking about the diverse team you've got, if you've got maybe people in your team that are particularly quiet or introverted, and you've maybe got to have a conversation with them, I would really recommend having a read of that book, because it's got some really insightful resources and support around how they like to communicate. Time to think is around allowing people processing and cognitive time. So really interesting one. Crucial conversations, I would say, is definitely for challenging conversations around sales and targets, and those that are maybe more extroverted, and how to get the most out of the conversation. And Fierce Conversation by Susan Scott is referenced a lot with regards to employment law. Quite a lot of employment lawyers that I work with actually reference that to their employers. So again, if you're thinking of maybe a resource for your middle management team, or you'd like to kind of set some objectives for them, I would highly recommend Fierce Conversation. Is just a way to set out a really clear process and structure to having those conversations and being really proactive. So actions to take away. So explore what's really going on, the power of listening. That starts from day one. Whether it's a complaint that's come in, whether it's a disgruntled employee, whether it's a objective that's not being hit. So really explore what's going on and understand the facts. What support is the organisation going to provide? So have you got occupational health? Have you got an employee assistance program that you can reference people to support them with other aspects of their life? Remember, we talked about, are they just a difficult employer, or are they suffering with difficulties? So just help them with potential resources that they need that would then boost their success in the business. Consider mediation or coaching is always key. Again, if a claim goes as far as a court, they'll always ask what mediation or coaching was done, especially if it's performance related. Conduct and capability is key. Always check your policies. So check ACAS, they're regularly updating things. They just released actually last week reasonable adjustments update for mental health disabilities. So again, when having these challenging conversations, just check your policies are up to date and you're working in line with those. And does your management need further support and resourcing? So I think that was the highest ticked one on this webinar with regards to lack of support and resource and training. So again, how can you deliver this guide? How can you deliver this training and give them some tools that they need to go and cascade this down? So hopefully you'll now be able to identify why you find those challenging conversations so difficult, explain how to fully prepare for the conversations, summarise how to handle those well, and we've done a list of do's and don'ts. So hopefully that gives you a really high level overview of challenging conversations and how to incorporate that in a very diverse workforce. For the future sessions we've got going on, so the next session is on the 18th of July, and it's on unconscious bias, so challenging your assumptions. Really interesting one to dial into, but there's just a couple on screen to help you. That's what's on our programme. And I think that's the end of our session today. I'll go back to Julia. I'm sure she's been manning the chat for me, if that's okay.
Thank you for that, Holly. We don't actually have any questions from delegates, so please feel free. Those of you that are dialed in, do feel free to put a question in the chat box. We do have 5 minutes or so for Holly to respond to any of your specific questions. As I say, that can remain anonymous, so don't feel that you might be opening yourself up to being identified as to what challenges you have in your own firm. It will be anonymous. Just on the basis of some of the questions that Holly has put to delegates and actually the responses that you've given in the polls, I would like to emphasise that Searchlight can speak to you and your business directly about your own bespoke requirements on diversity, equity and inclusion, planning, strategies, legal implications, etc. So if you wanted to reach out either to Holly or Tracy, whose contact details are on the slide shown at the moment, or indeed to the MGAA, they would be very happy to speak to you directly to tailor your requirements. And that would be a chargeable service, but certainly they've worked with the insurance industry and MGAs for very many years, so they would be happy to speak to you, and irrespective of the size of your company, whether a small concern or large. As Holly said, our next session will be on July the 18th. So that session, you will be able to sign up to that session by the end of the week. This video is being recorded and also will be uploaded. Someone's just asking that now, actually. This video will be recorded and, it has been recorded and will be available within your dashboard under events by the end of, I would think, in a couple of days' time, certainly by the end of this week. So you can rewatch, you can refer to, and you can send on to your colleagues. The slide deck or a PDF version of it will also be available, and that will be sent out to everybody that's registered. So those that have attended will also have the copy of the slide deck. Again, if you have any questions on the topics that Holly's covered, please feel free to either reach out directly to Holly or to the MGAA, and we'll be happy to either field your questions or, as I say, pass them on to Holly.
I've got two, I think, in my direct messaging. So Julia, do you want me just to answer those?
Yeah, if you have time, that'd be great. Thanks, Holly.
Yeah, so team member claiming discrimination from another team member by using inappropriate comments. When and how do you start to record this? Yeah, great question. So I guess for my first initial reaction to that is obviously you've got an allegation there of discrimination. So I would initially go record the allegation from the employee, and then I would do an investigation into the facts around that. And sometimes that's better done by a third party or someone not involved directly within that team. Just brings that kind of really neutral investigation to a summary. And I think it's about establishing the facts. If the investigation then would lead to the fact that the comments were happening, then obviously my response would be dependent on the severity. You'd kind of look to maybe go down a disciplinary route with that employee around appropriate language and discrimination. If it wasn't the fact that the comments were made and it's just maybe a misunderstanding, then you would start to be, obviously you'd have that on record anyway, that the allegation's there. You'd start having those conversations between the two, maybe separately, around communication style and conflict, and understanding each other a little bit better. We do, session 5 is going to be on inclusive communication, so that's probably one that's really key to look into. But I would just try to establish the severity of the allegations, because if you've got somebody claiming discrimination comments, I would say from the kind of immediately, as soon as you've got that, you want to kind of be pursuing a more of a formal route with that, because Unfortunately, if the business doesn't look into those in an appropriate manner, then they could potentially leave and claim constructive dismissal because their role was untenable. So just take appropriate action with that one. And I just got one other one, which is how to make it fair, being flexible to young working mums needing time off for children and other team members that don't need time off for external commitments. Really great comment. Again, that probably does bring some challenging conversations around Susan or Sarah have taken, time off this week, and I don't get that time off. I think it's about looking at your family-friendly policy. The legislation doesn't state that you have to give paid time off for time off for dependents. So there's no legal requirement. I think that comes back down to your cultural alignment and actually how you apply that in a fair and reasonable manner. So I've seen people where they do sort of a flexible policy, which kind of covers everything. So it allows people that maybe don't have children, maybe they have a bit of flexibility in terms of being able to go to their doctors and dentist appointments. So it feels a level of equity there. So that's a great question, but it's something that needs to be aligned with your culture, and definitely try not to overuse the word discretionary because it's just way too vague and then people don't know the boundaries. So yeah, great questions. Feel free to, I think we've still got a couple of minutes if there are any others, or like I said, my email's on the slide, so would welcome anyone to drop me an email. I'm happy to help and support a business.
Thanks, Holly. I think that's a really interesting point, kind of last minute there, discretionary, because that I can imagine land you in all sorts of trouble as a senior leader or manager. Discretionary, I'm assuming by virtue of the translation of it, says we can give it to you or not, and it's up to us, which does seem to indicate that there could inadvertently be a level of unfairness there.
Correct. Yeah, I think it's one to try to avoid because it just naturally comes with sort of preference and alignment. So your discretionary calls then create a preference, and then into doesn't create inclusivity. So yeah, where possible, try to just clearly define the boundaries and expectations. And I've seen people set in their policies clear amount of minutes or hours per year where they can use for a whole bunch of things. So you're being completely open, and how that person needs to use that time is down to them. And if you say offered 3 hours for the year, or a day, and they've exhausted that and they still need time off for children, then that's what holiday is there for. Unfortunately, I'm a young mum, so I know that pain. But it needs to be workable for the business. The business can't hold that burden all on its own. But yeah, great question.
Thanks, Holly. So I think we're out of time, spot on 2 o'clock. So once again, Holly, thank you so much. Great tips there. A lot of food for thought, I think, for delegates to give them an opportunity to consider their own practices, their own culture, and to really drill down and to make sure some of those topics and I guess headings that you've covered really are kind of as solid and as foolproof as is possible. And again, just going back to that discretionary, I think that's a word that probably most businesses could consider taking out of their practices for the good part when they feel that they're being perhaps flexible. The direct discretionary piece can add to more problems than actually solve.
Right.
And to delegates, thank you so much. Thank you for the comment. Thanks for a very useful session. Thank you for taking your time to join us. Please look out for the opportunity to sign up to session 3, which would be available this week, and to the recording of this session, which, as I say, you can rewatch, refer to, or send on to your colleagues as you see fit. So it leaves me to say thank you again, wishing you a very pleasant afternoon, productive week, and we hope that you'll join us again soon. Thank you.